Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por la presencia. Tenemos hoy el honor de recibir al economista Laffer, que la mayoría de ustedes lo conocen. Un economista muy destacado que ha participado, además que tiene la virtud de haber participado en la función asesorando a gobiernos, o sea, no solo lo académico, a gobiernos como el de Ronald Reagan, y que va a ser muy interesante conocer todo su punto de vista sobre la economía internacional y sobre la Argentina. La idea del encuentro es presentación inicial, unas palabras del decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas, y después entramos a hablar, va a presidir las preguntas Ignacio Barnes, que es precisamente el director del Departamento de Economía, y ahí empezamos con las preguntas y respuestas, y al final solamente habilitamos también a ustedes a que hagan preguntas y respuestas para hacerlo más y de vuelta, ¿sí? Así que sin más demora arrancamos, así que sacamos jugo a la presentación.
Dear friends, professors, students of the university, it's a great honor for our house to have present today Dr. Laffer, a leading global thinker on economic issues who's well known to all of us. Some of his contributions, such as his famous curve, are still taught in our macroeconomic courses. In addition to having been an advisor to presidents in the United States, in 2019 he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor given by the United States. Our president, the University of the Catholic University, Miguel Schiavone, has asked me to specially thank Professor Laffer for visiting us and asked me to give him a small gift in the form of a mate. According to a survey within the university, the mate is the object that most represents our students. Mate is a symbol of friendship and dialogue, because we drink and we pass, and we all drink around the fire and camp and talk, and that is it's not football, it's a symbol of this university, but mate. Mate is a symbol of friendship and dialogue. We are very grateful that Dr. Laffer has come today to dialogue with us at the UCA. Thank you very much, Professor Laffer, and also to the Fundación de Platense Estudios that made possible this event. So, video, this, and then our short.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love Argentina.
So, I leave you with this.
Am I safe?
Yes.
We're going to start with some questions that I will present to Professor Laffer, which actually is, as Carlos has said, a very distinguished intellectual professor and influential personality in economics. Professor, since you first coined the concept of the Laffer curve, the maximum marginal tax rate in the US has been slashed from 30% to the current level of 35%, 37%, remaining below 40% since 1986. Do you see room for further reductions, considering the state of the public deficit in the United States and the volume of public debt?
My turn? Yes. Is it all right with all of you if I sit down instead of standing up? Is that okay?
It's okay, no problem.
Let me just say, I'm the same height. It is a great pleasure being here with all of you, and I love classes, I love students. Thank you all very much. I had this small man this morning. I hurt my neck going up like that. You know, when you look at taxes, and you know, it's very interesting because the purpose of taxes, when you think of taxes, and what is the reason for taxes? And if you look at taxes specifically, there are two types of incentives in economics. And economics, by the way, is all about incentives. It's all it is, just incentive-based. People like doing things they find enjoyable. They dislike doing things they find unpleasant. And the government can change the enjoyableness or the unpleasantness of activities. For example, if you subsidize an activity, it makes it more enjoyable, and people will do it more. If you tax an activity, people will find it less enjoyable, and they'll do less. All of you understand what I'm saying in this? I mean, that's just purely what it is. And when you do that, you look at taxes and you think of what is the purpose. And when you look at the incentives, there are two types of incentives. And it's very important you understand both types of incentives. Because they're very different. There are positive incentives and there are negative incentives. By way of illustration, if you feed a dog, you know where the dog will be. It will be where you gave it the food. Okay, that's a positive incentive. If you beat a dog, whack, 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 you know where the dog will not be. It will not be where you are. But you have no idea where the dog will go to. It'll go away. Negative incentives tell you what not to do, and positive incentives tell you what to do. Are you all following me in this? So when you look at taxes, taxes are a negative incentive. If you put a tax in, you know what people will try not to do. But you don't know how they won't try not to do it. They can put a tax, they can move to another location. They can go out of business. They can find tax shelters. They can do all sorts of ways around it. So looking at taxes, what you want to do is you want to have the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. So you provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. I hope you understand. You want the low. Why do we tax speeders on the freeway? We tax speeders on the freeway to get them to stop speeding. Why do we tax smokers? To get them to stop smoking. Well, then I'll ask you the question this way. Why do we tax people who earn income? Why do we tax people who employ other people? Why do we tax companies that make wonderful products we all love and make those products at very low cost, and they don't use lawyers or accountants? Why do we tax them? Well, the truth of the matter is we do not tax them to get them to stop earning income. We do not tax them to get them to stop employing other people. We don't. We don't tax companies to stop them from making wonderful products at low cost and lots of profits. We don't. But we tax them to get the revenues to be able to run government. That's why we tax them. But what I want to say to you is, just because we don't tax them to get them to stop earning income, don't you think for 1 second those same incentives don't apply just as well, irrespective of the purpose you put on there. And when you look at taxes, I'm going to go through this with you because it's so important. When you look at taxes and revenue, what you want to do is tax this society doing the least damage possible to collect the correct amount of money you need to run government. All taxes are bad, but some are worse than others. So what you want to do is you want to collect the requisite revenues you need by taxing in the least damaging fashion possible. Are all of you following me on this? You follow the logic, please, because it's really important. Now, when you look at these taxes, a lot of these questions are all in that. when I came into the thing there, I tried to explain it was, it was two government officials, one Dick Cheney and one Donald Rumsfeld. Now, just for the record, so all of you know, we are an incestuous little population in the United States. Dick Cheney was my classmate at Yale, one of my best friends. So Dick Cheney was chief of staff to the President of the United States. In fact, he was chief of staff to the President of the United States at age 34. Pretty young. Now, when I said that in a crowd, he said, no, Arthur, no, 33. He was a young student in our class, by the way. So when you look at these taxes, what you do is you ask yourself, when you put on a tax, there are two effects that tax has on government revenues. And the two effects are very simple. One is the arithmetic effect, and one is the economic effect. It is very true, if you raise tax rates, you will collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. That's very true. But it's equally as true, that's the arithmetic effect. But it's equally as true, the economic effect, which if you raise tax rates, you make that activity less attractive, and people will do less of it. These two effects, the arithmetic effect and the economic effect, always move in opposite directions, always. So when you look at them, the question is, where are you in the relationship? Sometimes when you raise tax rates, you do collect more revenue. You do. You collect more revenue, you got it. But sometimes also when you raise tax rates, you collect less revenue. The issue was with regard to Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld in this restaurant, was that they had put on a surcharge on income, a 5% surcharge. And what they had said as government people is that with a 5% surcharge, we'll collect 5% more revenue. No. You may collect 4% more, you may collect 3% more, but you might also lose revenue. Let me give you a good example. When Donald Trump came into office, he passed a bill called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, what did we do? I'm going to give you the four major features of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The four major features were we cut the corporate income tax rate from 34% to 21%. Okay, we cut the personal income tax rate from 39.6% to 37%. We also cut the inheritance tax, the gift and estate tax, okay, for people to give away money to their children or other people's children, whatever they do. We cut the tax on inheritances and on gifts. And lastly, we expensed capital purchases. Now, if you buy a machine, normally speaking, you're able to depreciate that machine, expense it over a long period of time, depending on the useful life of that machine. But what we did here in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is for the first year and a half, we did 100% expensing in the first year. So it increases the internal rate of return enormously. There were other features of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act I could go through, but that's the tax cut. Pretty big tax cut. Pretty big. All the major people said that revenue losses will be $1.5 trillion. And I can't even tell you how big a trillion is. It's got a lot of zeros, so like, it's 12 zeros. 12 zeros is a lot of zeros. You know what I'm saying? Well, let me tell you what happened. All right? It was passed in the fourth quarter of 2017. Prior to the fourth quarter of 2017, for the 2 years before that, US and European Union growth rates were virtually the exact same. All right? US outgrowing one quarter by a little bit, and then Europe outgrowing the next quarter by a little bit. Just a little bit, but they moved right together. Then all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter of 2017, bang, they separated. And the US started growing faster than the European Union zone growth rates. Over the next 2 years, US growth rates by quarter exceeded those of Europe. At the end of 2 years, US total output was 2.5% greater than it would have been had it continued to grow exactly at the European growth rates. Clear evidence that it stimulated the output, employment, and production. Next thing in there is, what happened to the unemployment rates? What happened to poverty rates? Especially, do these people know who Sias is? Emmanuel Sias, and they know Tomas Piketty. Tomas Piketty, you know who he is there, and you know Sancheva. These are all the income inequality people. I'm going to talk to you about income inequality at some length in this discussion. But if you look at all of them, they sit there and say income inequality worsened. Well, let me tell you what did happen. Poverty rates in the United States fell to their lowest level in history. Measurable, the poverty rate fell. Unemployment rates amongst the minorities, the disenfranchised, the poor, the less educated, the blacks, the Hispanics in the U.S. economy fell to all-time lows. This act created jobs, and people got incomes, and poverty levels dropped, the unemployment rate dropped dramatically. Now I'm going to get you to the one that we're talking about. Tax revenues. Now the professional economists in the government said that we would lose revenues for the next 10 years of $1.5 trillion. In the next 2 years, from the fourth quarter of 2017 to the fourth quarter of 2019, that 2-year period, okay, that 2-year period, total federal tax revenues were much, much larger than they were in the prior 2-year period. In fact, the increase in government revenues, was a larger increase from 2017 to 2019, was a larger increase than the increase was from 2015 to 2017. The federal tax revenues grew sharply during this period at a very large rate. A perfect example. Now, it is very true that corporate tax revenues did not rise. But then again, we cut corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. All right, they didn't rise. But all the other tax rates rose. Why? Because people got jobs. The payroll taxes increased. All of these other things. And one of the most important features of the cut in the tax rates is people who earn income at lower tax rates don't hire lawyers. They don't hire accountants. They don't hire deferred income taxes. They don't hire politicians. I know that. Does not happen in Argentina. But in my country, you buy politicians. In fact, do they know what barcodes are? When you go into a store, you have a little thing on the store, a barcode.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a barcode. That's, you know, politicians in the United States are required to have barcodes. So that lobbyists know exactly what they cost. That's a joke. Come on. I know that's not. So what you found happening is tax revenues actually rose. I could go through this on further, but again, remember, and I'm going to come back later, and I want you to ask me this later, because I really want to spend some time with you on Tomas Piketty. He writes these big books. He does it in French. I mean, do you know how amazing it is to me? I studied French for years, and I go over there to France. I was on the board of Vivendi on and I go over there to France. All these little kids spoke French. It was amazing. It took me years to study French, and yet these little kids all speak French. It's incredible. But I want to go to the purpose, because one of the purposes I want to talk about tax policy is income inequality. But are you with me on that? The tax structure. When I did Jerry Brown's now in 1992, just to go on taxes and really the way I think of tax, I was Jerry Brown's accountant. He was the governor of California for 16 years. He was governor for 8 years once, and then came back in and was governor again for there. And I was Jerry Brown's economist when he ran for president of the United States in 1992. Okay, he ran against a Southerner. He was from a place called Hope, Arkansas. You may have heard of the person. Billy Clinton. It was Billy Clinton. We were in the primary race. He called me and asked me for a tax plan. And so I said, come on down. He came down to my house in Southern California. spent the weekend. I have pictures of him with my two youngest children. I have 6 children. And the 2 little ones now are 40 and 41, but they were little babies back then in 92. We designed the tax code, what I thought was the optimal tax code. All right, what it was is, we got rid of all federal tax. Gone. No income tax. Gone out. No corporate tax. Gone. Right in the trash. No corporate tax. No death tax. Killed that. No capital gains tax. Gone. No unearned income tax. Gone. All these taxes gone. No payroll tax. Neither employer nor employee. We got rid of that as well. We got rid of the Medicare and the Medicaid tax. Okay, all of those taxes. We got rid of all excise tax. Gone. We just threw them all away. We got rid of all tariffs. All those taxes. We got rid of every single tax. Well, not quite. We kept one little bitty tax, which we call sin taxes. And you have them, we have them. It's the ones I referred to earlier. Why do we tax people on freeways? That's a sin tax. We kept all the sin taxes, which are basically alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and all of those specific taxes, because their purpose, the purpose of the tax is really important. Because their purpose is not so much to raise revenues as it is to stop people from doing bad things. I jokingly tell people that we Americans don't like people who shoot each other while they're smoking and drinking. So we had that was our practice. Now let me tell you what this would have been. Think about this. We got rid of all the taxes, and in their stead we put 2 flat rate taxes. One flat rate on business net sales. Okay, you call that value added, but I'm a conservative, I come from a conservative country. We call it business net taxes, so we don't get the value added. That's what Europeans do, you know what I mean? We don't do it. A VAT tax across the board. Oh, and another tax, we had a second tax, which was on total gross income. No deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions, no omissions, no credits, nothing. Just your total income and one tax on it. We had 2 flat taxes, one on business net sales and one on personal unadjusted gross income. You follow me in that?
Yeah.
Now, when I went to Jerry Brown and did this with him, we calculated what that tax rate would be. Static revenue, no Laffer curve effect on it, none. Just static revenue. If you took all the revenues in the federal government, less the sin taxes from the previous year, and you divided it by these 2 tax bases combined, all right, the number would come out 11.8%. That's the static revenue there. Now remember, that's 11.8% on 2 bases. One is on value added, and one is on personal unadjusted gross income, so it's really more than 11.8%, but it's on both times. You know, value added is roughly speaking GDP, and value added is roughly speaking total personal income. So we're taxing GDP and total personal income twice. One when it's earned, and one when it's spent. So that's the double entry there of the tax. We did that, that's the static revenue tax rate, with no Laffer curve effect. I wanted to make sure he felt comfortable. So before I told him that number, I rounded it up to 12%. So I could put a little cushion in there. When he got it, he rounded it up a little bit more to 13%. So that was the tax plan he ran on against Bill Clinton. If you saw the debates, he murdered Bill Clinton. I mean, Jerry Brown is a Yaley, all right. And so is Bill Clinton, by the way, just for the record, we're all Yaleys. But he went from 8th in the race to 2nd in the race. We would have beaten Clinton if he had nominated Jesse Jackson as his running mate. It's the most popular tax there is. When you look at people and you ask them, what's fair? What's fair? If you make 10 times as much as I do, you should pay 10 times as much in taxes as I do. You know, that was the model that went by, and that was the flat tax. That was what, can you imagine what the US economy would look like today if we had no federal taxes? None, not one, except for the VAT tax and the personal unadjusted. I mean, we'd be selling cars into central China. We'd be the most productive country in the world. I'll stop there on this. So, does that answer your question? I'm running long, but
That's perfect.
I assume That's why I'm here.
That's good. That's great. Thank you.
My mom said the biggest mistake she ever made was teaching me how to speak.
No, it's very nice that you provide very detailed answers. President-elect Trump has mentioned several times during the campaign and also after being elected, he's talking about his inclination to impose or even increase tariffs on imports as a means to protect American jobs from competition of certain economies. Do you see this as an overall incoming measure in several different markets, or more likely as a measure very specific, restricted to some market, some economy, or some product?
Let me, if I can, just give you a little background on trade, and I know it is, who teaches international economics? Is there any, you have here, is the international buzz? There are two things trade is important. Okay, if I can speak to this first, and then I'll go to the specifics that you're saying. Trade does two things for a country, both very wonderful. The first is the trade deficit or the trade surplus. This is the work of Sidney Alexander from MIT many years ago. But the trade surplus is a country's capital deficit. And the trade deficit is a capital surplus. If I take a machine in Mexico and I move that machine to Colorado, all right, that's a Mexican export, that's a Mexican trade surplus, that's a U.S. import, it's a U.S. trade deficit, and it's also a U.S. capital surplus because we now have one machine more than we had before, and Mexico has one machine less than it had before. So one of the major provisions of trade is the transfer of capital across the world. And capital seeks out the highest returns it can get. If you've got a machine in Japan and it's not making money, and it can make a lot more money in some other country, it will move there. And that will be a Japanese surplus, trade export. It'll be the other country's import, a trade deficit. It'll be the other country's capital surplus, and Japan's capital deficit. That's it. The U.S., and I can only speak to U.S., I wish I knew Argentinian history, but the U.S. from 1640 till 1870, is that 230 years? 230 years, we ran trade deficits every single year for 230 years, with 7 exceptions. There were 7 years that we did not run deficits. And if you were American, you would be able to guess which years those were. 1776 and 1777. For some reason, Britain was not willing to export goods to us during the Revolutionary War when we threw them out in the sugar. The next one was when they tried to come back and conquer us again, in 1811 and 1812. Again, they didn't export goods to us, those were years we ran surpluses. And the final 3 years was 1842 through 1844, when the canal bonds failed, the U.S. canal bonds failed, and the British lost all the money they'd invested in the U.S. And Rothschild said to America, "You'll never get another penny from us in the era." And of course, that lasted for about 3 years, then they started investing back in us again. Right. We built America to be the most powerful economic force on the planet because of trade deficits. We imported capital from foreigners, we combined it with our land and our labor, and we built the most prodigious economic force on the planet. And I mean, without the trade deficits, the U.S. would not be anything like it is today. That's the Sidney Alexander, that's the capital transfers across countries. There's another aspect of trade that is super important, and it's the one we're talking about today, mostly, not completely. Trade deficits are very much in the game today too. But the United States makes some products better than foreigners do. We're better in some things than foreigners. We make higher quality products at lower cost, some products than foreigners do. And foreigners make some products better than we do, at better, lower cost and better quality. We and they would be foolish in the extreme. If we didn't sell foreigners those products we make more cheaply and better than they do, in exchange for those products they make more cheaply and better than we do. It's called the gains from trade. Win-win. Comparative advantage. David Ricardo. This is all the theory of comparative advantage. Trade in this aspect is a win for the importers, and it's a win for the exporters. It's a win, 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 win. It's something for nothing. It's a huge gain. It's the gains from trade. This comparative advantage is the coolest thing about international trade. It makes your partners rich, and it makes you rich, and it's good for everyone. Any type of trade barrier reduces those gains from trade. It not only hurts the people you trade with, but it hurts you as well. Any type of protectionist legislation hurts the country that puts the protectionist legislation on, as well as the countries who they trade. Okay, you're all with it. Now, let's talk about politics. And I'm going to come at it two ways. One way you'll not like, but one way you will like. The United States of the major countries in the world, and I say that, I don't know how to say it nicely, but the United States is a very, very big country, big economy. Japan's a big economy, South Korea's a big economy, China's a big economy, European Union's a big economy. We are probably of the big countries, by far the most free trade big country. Now there are places like Hong Kong and Jersey, Guernsey, and Sardinia, those islands between Europe and Great Britain, and maybe in the Isle of Man that has no tariffs at all, maybe Macau, maybe Monaco, some of the little places that are free to trade. But the US is a very free trade country. All right? So what Donald Trump does in his talking is when he looks at these other countries, and this is a personal conversation on several occasions with him, he says, Arthur, I believe in free trade 100%. I've been ahead of a large company, a large international company. You know me well. I've known you for years and years. You know I'm a free trader. Everyone who heads a big international company is a free trader. Everyone. They all. He said, but I look at all these other countries that have all these restrictions on trade, and they're so silly, they don't know anything about economics. They don't even realize that their restrictions on trade hurt them as well as us. They don't realize that. The only thing these people care about is selling goods in the US market. That's the only thing. So how can I get them to the table to talk to me about reducing tariff barriers? They don't care. Japan devalues the yen so they can export more and import less. And I've got more gold in my pocket. That's what they do. And how do I get them? The only thing they care about with regard to America is our market. So the only way I can get their attention is I'm going to threaten them with tariffs. It doesn't matter how big, 50%, 100%, 200%, I will deny you access to the US goods market unless you come and negotiate with me for reciprocity. I want you to reduce tariffs, and you reduce restrictions, and you reduce non-tariff barriers. That is the only reason I threaten these countries. That's a negotiation ploy. Now, let me just tell you that we had 5 major trade deals when he was first president. He talks tariffs all the time. The 5 deals were USMCA, US and Canada and Mexico. And we lowered tariffs dramatically in that trade agreement. It's a much better deal for everyone included. We also had a trade deal with Japan, which lowered tariffs and non-tariff barriers with Japan. They're still very high in Japan, but we lowered them quite substantially. We had a very good deal with South Korea, which we lowered tariff barriers there as well. We had a good one with a country just north of you called Brazil. We had a good trade deal with them where we lowered tariffs, and also Ecuador. So when you look at what Trump does, as opposed to what he says, remember that the purpose of his talking is to bring these people to the negotiation table, to have them to reduce tariffs. When I look at Donald Trump in the US, I think you're going to see one of the freest trade countries you've ever seen, and I fully expect that the US will move very much in the direction of free trade. Now, just to be honest with you, I am much better at forecasting the past than I am the future. Just, if there's, what do they call it, quality guarantees on products? No guarantees. No money back there. But that's my view of the world. I think it's going to be a much better world, much freer trade, much closer. And I think that with regard to Argentina, I think Trump is in love with your president. I think your president is in love with Trump. Like every country, we Americans love every country, all right? But we love Argentina most of all. So I would really expect the U.S.-Argentinian relationships to expand dramatically over the next 4 years. That's me talking, that's not Donald Trump talking, but that's what I expect. There's one thing now I want to talk to you about that you're not going to like. Trade is not a political weapon. Trade is an economic tool to create prosperity for both countries. It's a win-win for both countries. And if you go against free trade, it's going to be a lose-lose for both countries. You know, if you put on tariff barriers, you're going to suffer as well as they are. All right? It's the exact opposite of win-win and gains of trade, comparative advantage. The exact opposite. We have departments in our government that yell at foreigners. The foreigners we don't like, we yell at them. We have ambassadors. The ambassadors say, I don't like you. Stop doing what you're doing. It's not about we hate you country. They talk a great deal, the ambassadors do. That's in the State Department. And that's their job, is to yell at foreign governments and to tell them off that you're a bad guy, blah, 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 blah. If that's not enough, we have a department in our government, I don't know if you do here in Argentina, it's called the Defense Department. If you don't really like them, shoot them. But don't ever, ever, ever use trade as a political weapon, ever. It's not the right thing to do. So when I see people telling me we need to sanction Russia, sanction China, sanction Iran, sanction North Korea, no. In fact, I know of no countries it's more important to deal with on trade than Russia, Iran, China, North Korea. When you trade with people, your business people deal with their business people, the two of you make money together, they become friends. Do you like people who pay you money? Yes, you do like people who pay you money. And they like you for supplying you with goods. It's a friend, win-win. Hey, hi friends. You remember their birthdays, their anniversaries. You have parties. You sit down and talk with them. You have, you're friends. Your business clients are your friends. You send flowers. Oh, I love you. Oh, by the way, Mr. China, you have a tribe up in the north called the Uyghurs, and you're not treating them very nicely. Yeah, but how about you Americans? You have black people down in Alabama. You talk about problems. That's what people do when they do business together. But when you pick trade, you lose that contact, you lose those relationships, you lose the ability to talk the situations out, and you become enemies there. Now, I am not suggesting that we sell Kim Jong-un nuclear weapons. No. But I am suggesting that we need to have rapprochement with Russia, rapprochement with China, rapprochement with Iran, rapprochement with North Korea, so we can talk, we can do business. You know, you like your friends. You know, if we're doing a lot of business with China, if they have a lot of investments in the United States, they won't want to bomb us. They don't want to bomb their investments. They don't want to bomb their business partners. It makes Bob Mundell, in his Nobel laureate speech, put it this way. This was 1999, my closest friend, my closest colleague. He said that it was the smooth-hauling tariff of the United States, protectionist tariff, that caused the Great Depression, and it was. And it was the Great Depression that caused World War II. Free trade is the one guarantee we have against World War and against hostilities. I'm telling you this, it's really true. And the most important thing is you trade with people you don't like. So you become friends, so you talk out their problems rather than you do. We have had sanctions in this country, in our country, against Cuba since 1959. That's a little island in the Caribbean, you know, Cuba, Fidel Castro. I have a couple funny stories about Fidel Castro, but I'll save it for later. We have had sanctions on Cuba since 1959. Blockade, Cuba, sanctions. How many years is that now? Is that 65 years we've had it on Cuba? Can you see how wonderfully they work? Oh, Cuba saw the light. Now we love you, America. Thank you for showing us the sanctions work. Now we understand we love you. And now we're pro-growth, free trade, democratic, economic capitalists. No, they hate us now more than ever. What happened when we stopped boycotting and putting on sanctions on Vietnam? Well, the U.S. and Vietnam kept along fine. We traded with them. Now we're not warring. I was over there in 1970 in Vietnam. That was not a pleasant place for an American to be. I can now go to Vietnam and smile and have fun. I'm going to say it really simply. Two things you need for peace. You do need a strong defense department. You need a strong defense. But you also need the carrot. You also need that if we're friends, you'll have economics with us and we'll do business together. Remember, trade is really, really important. I know a very little on earth that matches free trade for prosperity and for peace. I hope I made my point clear. I'm an economist, and I can say this word, I don't give a damn about what your opinion is. This is about facts. Under Ronald Reagan, we had no wars. Under Joe Biden, we had a lot of wars. Under Donald Trump, we had no wars. And I am fully expecting as soon as Donald Trump takes office, that you're going to see the Ukraine war end, you're going to see the Gaza situation clear up, and you're going to see the Houthi rebels no longer fighting rockets and ships in the Red Sea. Two things that guarantee peace: strong military and free trade. Be our friends. Come on, we'll welcome you into our markets. Please, we'd love to have you make money with us. Oh, and by the way, if you decide to be nasty, we also have a pretty strong defense. You follow me? Thank you. Understand trade is for economics and only for economics. Yes, right.
Thank you. Very, very clear. But the next question is about the reduction of tax rates on main topics. And I mean, it's well known that those taxes that affect particularly investment and consumption have been shown to be a powerful measure to increase economic growth. Could this approach also be applied in Argentina, a country with a very large public debt that is not preferred by many bond investors, and which is proud of the recent recovery of sound fiscal balance as one of its main achievements? Or perhaps a strong reduction in taxes would be too risky under our current scenario?
I don't want to talk about Argentina. I'm not Argentinian. I'm not here to criticize or to compliment. I'm here as an economist. So if I can miss with commenting so much on Argentina, and I also did spend a long time yesterday with the president, just the two of us, for probably an hour and a half talking. He's a very knowledgeable person on economics. As far as world leaders go, politicians I've met in my life, he is very knowledgeable in economics. He's twice as good as a professor from MIT. Put it that way. Now that usually is a very low bar. But he is very good. So I don't want to talk about what we talk about, but I will talk about the issue of debt. That's what your country has a fair amount of debt. You're talking with the IMF about the debt relief and can you do these economic reforms given the debt? What will happen if they did it and you didn't have the revenue? All of these things are very serious worries. I'm going to pull you back from the serious worries, which are real. They are real. But I'm going to talk to you about debt in general. All right? Especially international debt. And how you can solve the debt. If you look at debt, and I'll use the United States as an example. U.S. debt as as a share of US GDP, okay, debt to GDP, it's about 135%. It's about the highest it's ever been, and it's been rising. And everyone I know starts going, oh no, and I don't let them go up the elevator for fear they'll jump out the windows. They're all complaining how much is our grandchildren are going to suffer and die and all this. But let me go through this with you just analytically. Take a very deep breath. Pretend you didn't have any coffee this afternoon, so you're not nervous. Okay? That is the wrong measure. Now, I was the first chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget when it was formed in 1970. I was 29 years old. I was George Shultz's chief economist back then. Okay? And when you look at debt to GDP, it is incorrect to measure that debt by total debt to GDP because a lot of that debt is injured. Welcome. It's a very nice having you. You take out a pad of paper, would you please? No, just joking. You missed the exam. No. Okay, the debt they look at is gross debt. A lot of the debt of the US government, and I'm sure of the Argentinian government, I don't know the facts here. I really don't. But the large portion of US debt is owned by US government entities, non-government agencies, the Federal Reserve, other departments and agencies that hold on their balance sheet. So what you have to do, like you do with a company, is you have to consolidate the balance sheet and look at net debt. Okay, in the US, that 135 goes down to about 105%. Now that's still a very large number, but it's not as large as 135, okay? 135%, sorry. Okay, you with me on that? Now the next thing is, are any of you business students here? Some of you business, well let me just say that if you are looking at business economics, let me just say, never, ever, ever compare a stock with a flow. You never compare a flow with a stock. You always compare stocks with stocks and flows with flows. You look at balance sheet items, and compare balance sheet items with balance sheet items, and you compare income statement and cash flow statements with income statements and cash flow statements. You never mix the two ever. It is totally inappropriate to look at US debt, which is a stock, and compare it to GDP, which is a flow. If you want to do an appropriate comparison, you look at the stock versus stock, which would be total US debt compared to total US wealth. That's a correct measure. Or if you want to look at it in flow terms, it would be looking at total debt service in the US with total GDP. That would be a correct way of doing the comparisons there. Now, when you look at it that way, if you look at total debt compared to total wealth, the number's about 20%-ish range in that there. Debt, US debt's about 20% of total wealth, which is a high number, but it's not jumping out of the window. If you look at borrowing money to buy a house, what does the banker ask you? The banker asks you, what's the loan to value of the house? That's the first question. Is the collateral good? Then the second question they ask you is, can you afford the monthly payments? That's the debt to wealth, and that's the debt service to GDP. If you look at debt service in the US to GDP, the number comes out a little bit less, about 3% of GDP, which again is too high, but it's not scary high. Now, the last thing I want to go through with you here, there are a couple of other things I'd love to if we have a long class on it that are very important, but I'm not going to. But the last one, debt is neither good nor bad. Debt's a tool. I mean, I should not say that. If I were in Tennessee, I'd say guns can be a problem and they can be a benefit, but I know you guys don't do that, so what can I say? Some things that are good and bad, either way. Let me just say that. No one that do not do that. Why? I'll just leave it at that. Debt's a tool. Debt's the way of transferring resources from savers to investors. And I'll give you an illustration. I'm going to lend you all the money you want, at a 1% interest. That's your cost. And I'm going to let you invest all you want at 15% credit guarantee. How much would you borrow? All the money you could get your hands on. Now reverse those numbers. I'm going to let you borrow all you want at 20% and let you invest all you want at 1%. How much are you going to borrow?
Zero.
None. It depends upon the spread. When you look at debt that has a lower interest cost than it has an interest return is fine. Debt that has a higher interest cost than it has return is catastrophic. It depends upon the spread. Now, when we came into power in the US in 1981, on January 20th, 1981, when he's still in my heart, when God still loved America, and the skies cleared, the fields turned green, the flowers blossomed, the fruits were there, the animals multiplied, the orphans were all adopted, and the world was beautiful, and Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. We inherited a country. We inherited a country that had been run into the ground by the Four Stooges. I called them the Four Stooges. The largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance ever put on planet Earth. Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. God help me for that. I mean, we found our country had been run into the ground by these awful presidents. And so we dug into the rubble, found this little medallion made out of platinum, polished it on our jacket, put it on the wall and said, USA Inc. And then what did we do? We then went and borrowed lots and lots and lots of money. And boy, did we borrow lots and lots of money. And what did we use that money for? We used it to lower tax rates, to build a stronger defense, to deregulate the economy. We did all these pro-growth agenda items. We borrowed money at a certain interest rate. We invested that money in tax cuts, pro-growth policies all the way through the US. And then we sat back and prayed and hoped it would work. And it did. We sent the rocket ship to the moon. If you look at the growth of the US, it was astounding. And then we grew so large. And my next favorite president after Ronald Reagan was a man named Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, when he came into office, the country was very rich. We had already grown rapidly. Well, what does a rich person do who has lots of debt? The rich person pays the debt back. So that's what Bill Clinton did. We borrowed lots and lots of money, and Bill Clinton paid it back just the way he was supposed to do. And we had a long period of 60, I'm jumping over George Herbert Walker Bush, who was awful, just awful, but not terrible. But Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan were a perfect duo in economics. Reagan borrowed the money, invested it correctly, created the wealth. Then Bill Clinton had the money and paid all the debt off. He ran budget surpluses there. That's what debt is supposed to do. Then you get to the year 2001, when W comes into office. He's just like his dad, really bad. Then we go to Obama. Obama came into office, just like that. They borrowed lots and lots and lots of money. But they used the money to pay people not to work. They used the money to regulate the economy. They borrowed at 20% and they invested at 1%, and you'll wonder why the economy went right into the ground. Bang. This is what you do. When you look at debt, debt depends upon the spread. You need to measure things correctly first. Then you need to look at the spread. Now, let me tell you what will happen. If we get our tax plans in, if we get our deregulation plans in, if we get our sound money in plan, if we get free trade in plan, if we get government spending restraint in plans, believe me, the U.S. will grow rapidly, the deficit will shrink sharply, and U.S. debt will become a problem of the past, not the future. The best way to solve debt is to grow fast and increase your incomes, and that is the way I think we go. That is the way I think will happen in Argentina. I don't know how you get from here to there. I don't know. I don't know the politics. I don't know the problems and all that you have in Argentina. But Starting here, I know you want to be there. That's what you want. How you get from here to there. And I believe on all the interviews and all the discussions I've had with your leaders, and I've had a lot of them, and they've lasted a long, long time in great detail, and with some tough conversations with them as well. Okay, having those conversations. I believe every single one of your government leaders today wants to go from here to there for the right policies. How they do it, I don't understand, and I defer to their knowledge of politics. But I think you're in very good shape here to understand how to get that debt out. Poor people cannot pay off their debts. They just can't. You know, I've never heard of an economy. I've never heard of an economy being taxed into prosperity. Maybe I missed that in the economy. Okay, I've never heard of a poor person spending himself into wealth. It's stupid. It's bad economics, and it only is taught at Harvard, Princeton, MIT, and Yale. So avoid those schools. If you want to be, I used to say this about my dear friend, a man, I don't know if anyone here knows who Domingo Cavallo is. I used to come down here all the time in the mid-90s with your president, Menem, and there were a lot of my students running in Pedro Poe, Rocky Fernandez, Carlos Rodriguez, Masid. Domingo Cavallo was the only person in Argentina at that time that had a degree from Harvard. So my comments to Domingo, I said, Domingo, you are the smartest person who has ever graduated from Harvard. You will only hire Chicago boys. So that's my thing there. But you guys can do the revolution again and bring the debt under control quickly and properly with the right tax policy, spending policy, monetary policy, trade policy, and regulatory policy, and you're off to the moon. You have incredible future in front of you. Oh, sorry.
But I have one last question before going into those questions that students in the public are going to ask you. And this is about the tax structure, although you may have indirectly answered before. Could you give us, short explanation of, in terms of tax rate reduction? Would you recommend, generally speaking, not in particular for one country, that is Argentina in the United States, specifically to lower taxes on consumption, personal or corporate income, or even trade tariffs? I mean, if you're thinking about increasing economic growth.
He said short. I remember I told you my mom said the worst thing she ever did was teach me to speak. That never stops. But I do want to talk about one of the topics, and I think it's important with you. You all know who Thomas is, and I want to talk to you about that, if I may. Is that legal? Because I think probably most of your students are very much into equality and inequity and the maldistribution of income in this world. It's a big, big topic. Everyone talks about it. All of them can sit there for days talking about it. And I want to talk about it with you. And I want to talk about it seriously. And I mean that in all honesty. I can easily imagine a world where I raise taxes on rich people, I take that money, and I then use it to help poor people. That makes perfect sense to me. I can also imagine a world, because I'm an economist, I can imagine almost anything. I can also imagine a world I raise tax rates on the rich people. The economy suffers. The rich people hire lawyers and accountants and deferred income specialists and government officials. And they shelter their income like mad. And they pay less in taxes. And there's no money left for the poor, and the poor get destroyed. Both are possible. This is an area where describing a problem is not sufficient. And I'm going to use a phrase here that I don't give a damn what your opinion is. I really don't care what your opinion is. I don't even care what your credentials are. I don't even care how tall you are, or how smart you are, or where you went to school, or whether your mom's a nice person or not. This is about facts, and only facts, and it's not about how you feel. This is about tax people. So, I did a book. It just came out. Some of you may have seen this. It's an academic book, but it's fun. Well, it's in economics, it's fun. It's a little bit boring, but you know. It's called Taxes Have Consequences. And it is the complete history of the U.S. income tax from the year 1913 to today. It's 110 years worth of data. We allowed in our Constitution, we had the 16th Amendment to the Constitution in 1913, early 1913. It passed. Within 6 months, we put in a progressive income tax. And it progressive because the rich, they can afford it. You know, come on, they got a lot of money. Rate tax them, give the money to the people who need it. So we put that tax in 1913. For the first year, it lasted only 2 months because it was put in November and December of 1913. At that time, there were 358,000 people required to file the income tax. That was what it was. That's out of 62 million adults in the U.S. at that time. So the number of people required to file taxes was a tiny bit of the population, less than 0.5%. And within that little bitty, teeny, tiny bit, the rate went from 0% to 7%. Okay, that was the first tax. That was the first year of the year. In 1914, it stayed the same. 1915, it stayed the same. And then, boom! By 1918, that tax had gone from 7% to 77% on the rich. Is that a big enough increase for you? The number of people required to file went from 358,000 to 6.5 million. All right? Now, the government had reasons for this. There was a war, it was called World War I. We had a pandemic, and so they had all the excuses. But after the war, they didn't cut the taxes. No, they did not. So we had an election in 1920 between Harding and Coolidge and Cox and Roosevelt. Cox was the governor of my state, Ohio, and his best friend, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was Undersecretary of the Navy at the time. That was the Democrat. The Republicans won by the largest percentage ever on the promise to cut taxes. And they cut those taxes from 77% down to 25%. The period was called the Roaring '20s, the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history. The price level fell. U.S. budget, the government's budget. Now, come on, you know these guys. They've never seen a dollar they didn't spend. That's who they are. They spend and spend. We had budget surpluses for 11 straight years. And then, of course, in 1930, as I mentioned earlier, we had the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That was Bob Mundel's speech. Then we raised the highest tax rate from 25% to 63% on January 1st, 1932. Hoover lost the election. Roosevelt came into the first wealth tax in the United States. They confiscated all gold from all Americans. And devalued the value of the dollar dramatically against all the big wealth tax, huge. And then they raised the highest tax rate in 1937 to 79%. And they raised it to 1944 to 94% in 1944. Go teach those rich people, boy. Look at them. And then we had 3 tax cuts after World War II. Harry Truman, our president, vetoed all 3. But fortunately, the Congress overrode his veto on the 3rd one, and we cut tax rates after the war with this boom. And then they raised it back up again with the Vietnam War, back up to 91% the highest tax rate. Then John F. Kennedy cut it down to 70%. Then Ronald Reagan cut it down to 28%. We have a huge history of data. We have every single tax return person, people. We know. We have the tax return of the last guy in the top 1%. We got his tax return. We don't have his name. They won't give us his name. But we know how much he earned. We know how much the deduction were. We know how much he paid in taxes. We know the first guy, and about 99%. We have every day. There are no sampling problems in any of the 6, Mr. Piketty. Mr. Saez, look at data someday, please. Would you please do this? We know what happened when we raised taxes on the rich. It's a factual-based analysis. Every single time we raise taxes on the top 1% of income, every single time, 3 things happen. The economy went into the doldrums, underperformed every single time. Every single time tax revenues from the rich went down, and every single time the poor were damaged beyond repair. Every single time. If you think the Great Depression was good for being the poor person, you're crazy. But that's when they raised the taxes up to 94%. If you think World War II was good for poor people, you're crazy. The average after-tax wage for a worker in the United States went back to where it had been a century earlier. It was terrifying for poor people. That's what happened when we raised it. Now what happened when we cut taxes? When we cut tax rates on the rich, the economy outperformed. Kennedy, go-go 60s, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, Harding and Coolidge. The economy really soared. Revenues from the top 1% of income earners went up, and the poor got jobs out of the funded production. That's the facts, people. Now, let me just tell you what Saez and Piketty say. And they say this in the most deceitful. I'm going to be me, okay? Let me be me. I'm going to say it the way it's true. The most deceitful and disingenuous way I can imagine. They say income inequality. When you raise tax rates on the rich, income inequality declines. That is true. But they don't say why it declines. And I'll tell you why it declines. It declines because the poor get poor faster than the rich get poor faster than the poor get poor. And I'll go through this with you. It really is true. There are two ways to reduce income inequality. One is to get the poor rich faster than the rich are getting rich, and the other way is to get the rich get poorer faster than the poor get poorer. Using income inequality as a measure is absolutely inappropriate. The dream in our countries, the dream in our world, is not to make the rich poor. The dream in our world is to make the poor rich. It's to balance up, not down. And what you know happens whenever we cut tax rates on the rich, the poor have earned better, higher incomes there. Now, it's true the inequality has gotten higher, that's true. But that's not, the rich got richer. You know, the way you solve poverty is by growing out of it, by providing jobs. The best form of welfare is still a good, high-paying job. And if they would only look at the facts. And anytime you guys could get this, told Mr. Piketty here, I'll fly down on my own to take that guy on for 2 or 3 hours. He and Saez, none of them will debate me in the US or anywhere. They don't debate. They tell. Although he got his honorary Harvard degree on my economics, his work on the Laffer curve was what he got his honor. It's outrageous, the disingenuous dissembling that goes in this. And I mean that very seriously. Tax rate periods, I hope I've covered it very well. I hope I've covered it. To all of you understand what I'm saying, please do. Because, you know, to pretend you're for the poor and they kill them is really wrong. You know, they accuse us of the crimes they commit. And academics should not be this way, just for the record. You've got to be honest, you've got to give green eye shades, you've got to call the shots correctly. It's about numbers, it's about data, it's about facts. And good theory should be based on facts and only on facts.
Bueno, vamos a pasar a las preguntas y respuestas. Ahí vamos, muy bien.
Thank you. I've been dying to ask this.
No, you've got to come back. I won't hear it.
Okay.
No, you give him the microphone. No, give him the microphone. Give him, but you come back so I can ask you what he said.
Okay.
I know, but I'm here, don't hear well even in English. I'm old, I've got hair in my ears. I'm 84 years old. I need someone next door to me. Yeah, it's good. Come on.
Actually, I've been dying to ask you this. You commented earlier that there's not only a problem about rates, you comment about making a structure where you have a flat rate tax and also a VAT tax. We have something kind of like that here. our states charge us the ingresos brutos, which is a flat rate tax on income, without any depreciation or cost that you can take off the income. And then you have the VAT tax, rather, also you have on the other, right? My question is, I saw, because I am an accountant, my parents are accountants, so I saw this throughout my life. VAT tax is a really bad example to tax people, because you have a lot of bureaucratics behind that. You have to hire accountants because you have to make calculations to know how much you have to pay. So that cost, I would prefer to make it a flat rate tax. So will you say that, sorry about the,
That's why I want you next to me.
So my question goes, have you ever heard about the unique tax theories, that they are like kind of a utopia, where you have a unique tax over a person all his life? Which one will you choose? I gave you my answer question. Which one will you choose in all the options we have today to only have one tax in all the society? Which one will be the best way to tax society now?
Let me steal this back if I may. They asked me what would be my preferred taxes. I don't know what my preferred tax would be in Argentina. I don't. And I'm not Argentinian. I don't know the details. I don't know why a truly flat tax in the provinces, why you need an account at all. For a flat tax. No deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions, no credits, no write-offs, no omissions, no anything. You just, in fact, you wouldn't even have to pay a tax. The one I did with Jerry Brown, which I talked to you about with Jerry Brown, the one I suggested, you'd never even have to file a tax return. The company would collect the money. If it were 13% flat tax, if they owe you $100, they'd send 13 into the government, and they give you 87, so you don't even have to file a tax return. So that's the tax I like to see. That's the one we did there. So that's the way I go on a true flat tax. I just have the companies collect it, and the companies send it in. I think individuals are uniquely unqualified to file tax returns. They just aren't financially savvy. Businesses are really good at financial dealings, and they are. So if the business owes you money, they just pay the taxes for you, and then they send you the tax amount. That's the way I do it. Does that make sense to you? Now, it would, unfortunately, deprive you of a job.
I was about to say that. I actually make my living from this, but I don't care. I want to see that. I can't work for it.
I made a joke at your expense. You see what I'm saying in the tax? That's what we do. That's what I did with Jerry Brown. I mean, you asked me something I actually did, which I did design his flat tax, and that is exactly the tax I would do. I do one on value added, and I do one on personal unadjusted gross income, and you try to limit it at a low rate, no deductions. You have 10 children, no deductions. 2 children, no deductions. 1 child, none. No deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions. Everyone pays the same rate on every single dollar they earn to the last dollar. So there's no advantage of shifting income. There's no advantage of shifting location. There's no advantage on any of these other provisions. It's what I will.
Thank you.
Siguiente pregunta. María Raquel. Sí, vamos.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Hi.
What do you think about the tax in the different states? Because I think you are talking about a federal tax equal for every state in the United States, for example. But the states have the freedom to its own taxes, even every country competing with taxes. What do you think about this different between states or countries?
I don't know how Argentina runs. I
No.
don't know. But let me tell you, the United States, we have 50 states in the United States. And each state is allowed to experiment with taxation, with government spending, with regulations, within bounds. All right, there are constitutional bounds on that. There is also legislative bounds on what the states do. But they have enormous flexibility on what they do. And what you do is that we have an experiment going on in the United States, a cauldron of experimental data, of people trying to find better ways to do things. I wrote a book, another academic book, in 2014, which was, I shouldn't have done this, but I named the book, An Inquiry into the Causes and the Nature of, Inquiry into the Nature of Wealth, and I just called it states instead of countries, all right? I looked at all the states in the United States. Now, the neat thing about all the states is we have no restrictions on the movement of goods or people. Anyone can move anywhere at any time in the United States with no regard, as long as they are willing to live by the laws in the place they move to. And it is against the Constitution for any type of barrier to be put on any movement of goods and services or people across the economy. So it is a totally free trade of all 50 states. And we have, I'm going to give you two examples there. We have states that have income taxes and states that don't. If you look at the income taxes, those states without an income tax are by far the best performing states. There are 9 states in the United States that have no income tax. You'll recognize them: Nevada, Texas, Tennessee, where I live, Florida, South Dakota, all right, New Hampshire, Alaska, and Washington State. Those 9 states are by far the best performing states in the nation, the best budgets, the best group. Everyone is moving from every other state. Now, let me just say, if you have 2 locations, A and B, if you raise taxes in A, if you lower them in B, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from A to B. If you look at the migration patterns in the United States, it is amazing how people are incentivized to leave New York, to leave California, and to go to Texas, to go to Tennessee, to go to Florida, etc. I moved from Southern California, beautiful, love it. But it's a lot more fun earning income with lower taxes. It's just much more fun. So that's there. We also have something that's really interesting. Since 1960, 11 states have introduced an income tax. 11 states. And I can tell you those states, the first one to do it was West Virginia. The last one to do it was Connecticut in 1991, West Virginia in 1961. Then sandwiched between those two was Maine, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, of all places. All of these, I may have missed one, but I don't think I did. So what I did was I took all 11 of those states that introduced an income tax. With me, they did it in different years. So I listed all those states down by the year in which they introduced the income tax. All right, so I lined them all up on that year. For example, Michigan was done by Mitt Romney's dad, George Romney, who did it in 1967. Ohio was done in 73 or something, whatever. So I listed them all by the year. And then I took the major economic metrics of all the states. Population, gross state product, migration, personal income, and tax revenues. And I looked at all those 11 states, and I looked at what their population was, what their gross state product was, what their personal income was, what their migration was, what their taxes were, relative to the 39 states that did not change their taxes. You follow me there? It's real simple, straightforward. And I looked at it over the 5-year period before they introduced the income tax. And I looked at it On the most recent 5-year period, pretty straightforward, simple, pretty good. I mean, you looked at all 11 states. Every single state, no exceptions, in every single measure, no exceptions, declined relative to the rest of the nation in every single measure we have. And they not only declined, oh, let me tell you, they didn't only decline. They fell flat on their faces. If they fell forward, they fell flat on both. They fell backwards. All right? They fell. Michigan, Detroit. When I was a boy in the 1940s, my mom and dad would take me by train from Cleveland, Ohio, to Detroit, Michigan, because Detroit, Michigan was the Paris of North America. The train station in Detroit was the Taj Mahal. You can't believe what Detroit was. You should see it now. It's a garbage show. My state, we have more Fortune 500 companies located in Ohio than them. Michigan went from 5.2% of the US to today it's about 2.5% of the US. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.85 million people. Today they have a population of about 600,000. Ouch. In Cleveland, you go back to my hometown where I love Ohio. I mean, you go back there are people with brown paper bags, buildings blown out, windows gone. Go to see the inner cities. Go to see them and look at them. Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas, wow. Nashville, Tennessee, wow. Cleveland, Ohio, St. Louis, Detroit. I mean, it is incredible what happened. Every single one of these states collapsed. And they not only collapsed, they crashed and burned. In New Jersey, and I'll tell you this, you'll see the reason. New Jersey in 1965 had neither a sales tax nor an income tax. It was the fastest growing state in the nation. People from everywhere were coming and moving into New Jersey, and they had a balanced budget. In the last 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when John Corzine was their governor, and I just say this because John Corzine was my student at the University of Chicago. But to be fully transparent and honest with all of you, he was a C student. And after the MF Global bankruptcy and corruption charge, I'm not even sure he earned the C, if you know what I mean. All right? They had the highest property taxes, highest sales taxes, highest corporate taxes, highest income taxes. Any state in the nation, the slowest growing state in the nation. People are leaving like rats out of a sinking ship. They have budget deficits, and it is a catastrophe. Those are the examples. I could go through all the others. If you want to look at Maine, oh, that's a lovely sort of Rhode Island. You can't make West Virginia poorer than it is. Oh, yes, you can. What is the income tax? You'll see we can go down. The last person will die. I mean, it is amazing the results. We have the perfect experiment. The perfect experiment in my country. And that's why I wrote this book, The Wealth of States, was because it is such a perfect experiment. You know, for cause and effect to be provable. And you know the conditions you need to get cause and effect to be able to show it. First, you have to have correlation. Without a correlation, there never is any causation, okay? You have to have correlation. Now, second thing is, and that correlation may be very obtuse, sir, you have to have isolation. A has to be correlated with B. But also A has to be directly correlated with B, not only through C. So you have to get rid of all the other correlations. So you need correlation number one, then you need isolation number two, and the last thing you need to prove causation is insertion. Now, if you have a B and it's there, and you introduce an A, you get a different B. That's the insertion. You have to be able to put it in and take it out. Smoking is a good example. All right, you look at a population. What's the health of the population? Now you get them to start smoking. And then what happens to the health of the population? That's the insertion. I don't know of any experiment in economics ever that comes close to a pure proof of causation than the states of the United States and what happened when they inserted the income tax, and watch what happened to those states when they put in their income tax and collected. So that's why I said that. If you want that book, it's called The Wealth of States. I published it in 2014. I've worked all my life on state economics, and it is the view of what's in. I compare Texas with California. I compare Florida with New York. I compare Tennessee with Kentucky. They're the same state. I compare New Hampshire with Vermont. Twin states. One did it, the other one didn't. And you can see the examples every single time. And it's not small, people. This is not, well, no, it's crash and die. So that's the answer I would give you on this. All right? I don't know about your provinces here or there, but I'm sure if they were given the same freedom, it would be the same. Second.
Vamos a la última pregunta, last question.
Well, as you may know, Argentina is trying to reduce its budget deficit, and many politicians and even bureaucrats have been discussing about tax expenditure. We have
Tax, what?
tax expenditure.
Oh, tax expenditure.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
We have almost 2.5 points of our GDP in tax expenditure, and the oldest policy is from I think almost 52 years. It's been implemented for that long. In the discussion, the aim will be to turn tax expenditure into budget expenditure. Because some of them think it is better to control or to measure, because when we have to measure tax expenditure, our main difficulty is that we do not have information enough to make figures, the figures we need to take decisions. My question is, do you think that expenditure should be kept as an effective policy for developing regions or industries, or do you think a budgetary expenditure is a better one?
I understand your question. It's very common, not a common question, but it's a question raised a lot. Has to do with tax expenditures. Remember when I went through the example of the dog, feeding the dog, and then feeding the dog? You never, ever, ever mix negative incentives with positive incentives, or positive incentives with negative incentives. Tax expenditures are always wrong. Tax system is a negative system. It's feeding the dog. You want to have the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. So you provide people the least incentive there because it's bad. Everyone hates taxes. So you've got to collect your revenues, you collect them in the least damaging fashion. If you want to help someone, write them a check. But never use a tax expenditure. Okay, that's the first. And that is, now politically, obviously, you probably can't do that on everything. There's some things you can do, but that's the theory and that's the right way to go. That's the North Star. Try to always go that way. The other one I want to come at you with, and this I wish again, my dear friends, Thomas Piketty, and Manuel Salles, and Gabriel Circuman, and what is the other, Sancheva, she's I think Croatian. We've got a nice mixture there for you, of ethnic balance and all that. It's called the transfer theorem. Now when I say transfer theorem, I use the word theorem in the mathematical sense of the word. This is not left-wing, this is not right-wing, this is not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not liberal, it's not conservative. This is math, people. And it's just math, okay? And I'm going to use it in the traditional Zuckman scientific ways. All right? And it's where I went back and I did all the data on my book, Taxes Have Consequences. By the way, I co-authored that book with Dr. Brian Demetriou and Dr. Jane Sinkfield. They were amazing partners in that adventure, so I don't mean to not mention their names. A transfer theorem, a transfer occurs. when you take money from one group and give it to another. That's a transfer. All right? You can transfer from young people to old people. I like that transfer a lot. You can transfer it from tall people to short people. I like that transfer too. But a transfer is when you take from one group and give to another. The normal way we describe it is you transfer from those who have a little bit more, because they can afford it, and you give to those who have a little bit less, and they desperately need it. With me, this is the normal way to do it. All right? Let me do the transfer theorem here with you. The transfer theorem, when you take it from those who have a little bit more, you give it to those who have a little bit less. All right? The first point I want to make is whenever you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they will produce a little bit less. Any arguments? Pretty common sense. If you tax people who work, they're going to work a little bit less, aren't they? Yeah, you with me? So whenever you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives and they will produce a little bit less. By giving to those who have a little bit less, you provide them with an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will produce a little bit less. I don't know how technically trained your students are here in math, but this is nothing more, it's nothing less than the Slutsky equation of the income effects and the substitution effects of a tax cum transfer. That's what it is, you know your math. So the first part of the theorem is very simple. Whenever you transfer income, you always reduce total income. If you're a Harvard professor, the math works just the same way as if you're a professor at OU, or if you're a young lady shopping in a grocery store in Modesto, California. It doesn't matter. It's math. Whenever you redistribute income, whenever you transfer income, you always reduce total income, period. There is no Keynesian multiplier. None. It's all nonsense. All right? That's the theory. Whenever you transfer resources, you always reduce total production. The lemma from this theorem is very fun. It's very nice. It should be pretty obvious to you, but I'm going to say it anyway, but I'm not going to prove it to you verbally. But I'll say it to you. The more you transfer, the larger will be the reduction in total production. Total income. That should be obvious. All right? Now, one I want you to get, this is the picture you want, this is the side one. I really wish Bernie Sanders were here today, or Elizabeth Warren, or AOC. I wish they were here in this group because they are delicious. If you were, this thing is the limit function of this theory. If you were doing the math, it's a limit function. If you even know how to do limit functions, it's the limit function of this theory. If you were able to redistribute all income in such a way that everyone comes out exactly the same, if you were able to do that, there will be no income whatsoever. Now let me prove that to you. I need to prove it to you. The only way you can redistribute income to make sure that everyone comes out exactly the same, the only way you can do that is you have to tax everyone who makes above the average income 100% of the excess, and you have to subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. And only in this way can you guarantee that everyone is exactly the same. Any question on that? Now, if you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and you actually did subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate today, Counselor, everyone will be exactly equal at zero income. The reason Pickett and Sias and everything find that raising tax rates on the rich reduces inequality is because they're making everyone poor. That's why they find it. But they don't tell you that, even though I use their exact data from their Institute of Inequality. I use their numbers, and their numbers show exactly what I described. The theorem here is clear. I don't care who you are, how bright you are, how stupid you are. It's a math theorem, people, and that's it. And I am disgusted sometimes by my profession, and I'm really disgusted a lot by politicians who actually sell snake oil as if it were good economics. The dream is for all of us to get richer. We're all in the same tub. We're all in the same thing. A rising tide, it raises all boats. And you know, when you look at this world, the dream is not to hate your neighbor. The need is to help the person who's not doing well, not to hurt the person who is doing well. Any questions on that, please? This is the final last message there. We're going to stop here. But I want you to understand that redistribution of income, all right, in the way of tax income subsidy to get equality, killing totally, that doesn't mean you don't help the poor people. It doesn't mean it at all. But the best form of welfare, is still a good, high-paying job. Period.
Muchas gracias a todos. Hemos aprendido mucho. We learned a lot. It was an honor having you. Thank you very much. Gracias a ustedes.